Hello, everyone. Bear with me on this. I know you guys are tired of hearing of this subject, and I promise I'll move on after this. But I do want to make one more video on this topic of, the definition of MGTOW, or an attempt to define MGTOW or put a loose definition on it. And in this video, I just want to relegate to you a couple of passages from an article written by Peter Wright. This article created some controversy amongst the MGTOW community a while back, and this was a voice from an article titled MGTOW Central, and I think it's integral to understanding that a loose definition of MGTOW is appropriate and is not, an attempt to control other MGTOW or anything like that. And I think that Peter Wright's own writings, who was the author of this article, demonstrate that as well and reflect that opinion. And so I'll read from you certain passages from that article, but I'll start with the comment that he posted on my video in response to the video titled More on MGTOW and the MRM, and I'll put a screenshot of that up as well. This isn't the full quote, but this is him responding to a question that I asked, or I don't know if it was me or somebody else, I really can't remember. But somebody asked the question of how does this egalitarian definition of MGTOW exclude people like the Dear Woman crowd? These men are self-determined too. And he says, no, they are not self-determined. The Dear Woman crowd and all pro-feminist men subscribe to determination of self by other. That's the exact antithesis of self-determination. The only self-determined decision such men make is an initial one to give up self-determination altogether. I've talked about determination of self by other too many times to count, and yet it appears too difficult a concept for some people to grasp. Fortunately, I don't need or desire others to grasp it, as it's my working model only. So again, I saw that comment by Peter Wright, and I thought I'd look into this self-determination versus self-determination of the other he was talking about. And that brought me to that article, the article on A Voice for Men titled MGTOW Central, which will be in the description box again. And so I'm just going to read to you some of the commentary. Now, this is a portion of the article in which Peter Wright attempts to hammer down a definition of MGTOW. And he says, after expanding on topics like hypergamy and Brufield's law, that, quote, any of these topics can serve legitimate interest for MGTOW, but the question arises of what binds these disparate ideas together. In order to find a definition of MGTOW, we must find a degree of general consensus, some shared factor among the variety of perspectives, or otherwise MGTOW will end up talking about entirely different things. And if there were no common consensus here, we would merely have debaters talking about different subjects. One would be talking about female hypergamy, and the other would be talking about celibacy with no common ground between them. So this is him saying essentially what a lot of MGTOW have been saying, is that if we allow MGTOW to mean anything, then it means nothing at all. And I'm in agreement with him, because again, this is actually what YouTube MGTOW have been doing, forming in Peter's own words, a degree of general consensus. And this is really no different from myself saying that a loose definition of MGTOW is necessary, and this invalidates the constant attempts to reduce MGTOW to whatever anybody and their mother says it is, which again is logically consistent with what YouTube MGTOW have been saying all along. And so his article continues by saying, quote, so we will need a universally applicable definition that will fit everyone's criteria for what MGTOW is, in spite of the different perspectives that different people hold on its nature. This definition must be a limited one, since it can encompass only those parts of MGTOW which all broader definitions hold in common. For this essay, the definition is this: male self-determination. That, then, is what everybody who discusses MGTOW holds in common regarding the concept. Note, in this definition, there is no reference to the disputed ideas or practices listed above. Some might insist on including those ideas in the base definition to piggyback it with a whole range of idiosyncratic concepts. But that is of no use here, for beyond this narrow definition, people basically disagree with each other. To be as objective as possible, then, we must take only that which everybody agrees upon as the universally applicable definition. That last sentence is very important. I'll read it again. To be as objective as possible, then we must take only that which everybody agrees upon as the universally applicable definition. And that's important, you see, because it hints that, according to Peter Wright, MGTOW is not merely defined by what we can refer to as, I think, therefore I am MGTOW. Meaning that simply saying you're going your own way does not make one a man going his own way. And Peter, at least here, acknowledges that a factor that goes into defining a MGTOW includes whether or not a group consensus defines you as such, even if it's just a general definition that we all share. Of course, MGTOW is growing and evolving. So if tomorrow a new group of MGTOW joins and they have an expanded definition of what MGTOW is, you can see the runaway effect take place. So again, we have to set boundaries. So you don't have to agree with that definition, but it's important to take a mental note of that because it invalidates the claim, according to Peter Wright's own words, that a community of MGTOW, such as the YouTube community, should have no ability to define what MGTOW actually is to the exclusion of others, which Peter does in this very essay a bit further down. He continues and says, quote, "Self-determination refers simply to the human right to determine the course of one's life and to apply self-advocacy in that direction." And let's not forget that the A in MHRA refers precisely to the same advocacy. Self-determination and self-advocacy were always there for men who chose it long before the MGTOW acronym provided another way to say it. We can also state that implicit in this definition is opposition to and rejection of gynocentrism as being the antithesis of male self-determination. Men who subscribe to gynocentric directives, this is important here that he says this, men who subscribe to gynocentric directives such as pro-feminist men are subscribing to other determination or determination of self by other and need not apply for MGTOW status, end quote. So here we see Peter Wright determining based on whether or not someone subscribes to gynocentric beliefs and attitudes that one cannot be a MGTOW. In other words, putting an exclusionary definition on the term, going as far to say that men who subscribe to gynocentric directives need not apply for MGTOW status. That's pretty exclusionary, and it makes sense. Again, this is how we keep gynocentric influence out of MGTOW, so it never gets to the point that, it gets watered down into nothingness. The problem with all this is, of course, that pro-feminist men are far from the only gynocentrists amongst us, and modern marriage, I'm assuming we can all agree, is probably the most gynocentric institution in existence today. Peter Wright expands on this himself by saying the following in regard specifically to traditionalism. He says, quote, "The widespread and increasingly popular stance in the MGTOW movement was elaborated largely by Paul Elam and Barbarossa. Traditionalism refers to traditional gender roles for men and women, roles which most everyone in the MHRM/MGTOW movement reject as destructive to a man's well-being and freedom. However, a small percentage of self-described MHRAs and MGTOW do advocate traditional gender roles, especially men in the earlier MRM who were split on this question, with perhaps half endorsing traditionalism and half rejecting it. Those advocating traditional gender roles claim men can enjoy significant freedom by stipulating what they are willing to accept as a viable and fair role division in relationships with women, a claim that can be demonstrated, they say, by a study of traditional males who embodied Sinatra's song, "I Did It My Way." Whatever freedom these men pretend to enjoy, they are still laboring within the narrow and self-limiting paradigm that requires male utility in exchange for a woman's charms, which means he continues to live the gynocentric way, even if he feels he is doing it his way. The man must continue to labor outside the home and bring home the bacon, while his wife occupies herself as a homemaker. In terms of logical categories, this is important. Listen to this. Listen to what he says. It's obvious that traditionalism and radical male autonomy are mutually exclusive, meaning that if traditionalists want a full taste of freedom, they must, by definition, look for it outside of the traditionalist template. So that's important because here we see that Peter Wright acknowledges traditionalism as a gynocentric institution. He outright says that traditionalism and radical male autonomy are mutually exclusive. And male autonomy, of course, is a huge part of the MGTOW identity. Thus, Peter's own definitions once again reflect pretty much exactly what YouTube MGTOW have been saying. That is, that those following gynocentric directives are not MGTOW. MGTOW have proven as a fact that as one enters into a marriage, one cannot consent to the future laws that will be amended to the marriage contract, and therefore cannot enter into a marriage with informed consent. It is also a fact that a woman can legally and lawfully enslave a man who has married her via divorce and alimony, making it legal forced wealth transfer from men to women. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't consider that a gynocentric institution. It literally exploits male labor for female benefit, which is, of course, the entire reason MGTOW and marriage cannot ever be compatible. Because marriage, according to Peter's own words here, are antithetical to male self-determination, in that this contract negates your ability to act autonomously the moment you enter into it. So then, with all that said, we must come to the conclusion that this desire to set a loose definition of MGTOW has existed for a very long time, and that it has also existed amongst the very people calling those in the MGTOW community ideologues for trying to do the same thing. And the question then becomes why? Why would these people, who at one point were advocating the same things YouTube MGTOWs are pursuing now, why do they have a problem with this now? My speculation is two things. First, these people want to be the only people who define MGTOW, and they also want to be the only ones defining MGTOW perpetually. So if it later becomes convenient for their purposes to rebrand MGTOW into something it never was, they want to clearly be seen as the authority to do that. YouTube MGTOW represent a threat to that authority, and I don't think they like it very much. And when I say authority, I'm not saying, we demand that you do this or we demand that you do that. But in the general opinion, they want to be seen as the authority, much like a historian is seen as the authority on a subject. So, and that then brings me to the second reason. The second reason is that I believe that now that there's an influx of traditionalism making its way into the MRM, some men's rights activists wish to capitalize on the support, both financial or otherwise, that these traditionalists can bring. And as such, some of these MRAs see the time to rebrand MGTOW as something that is definitively anti-marriage into something that's inclusive of marriage and also of traditionalism. So again, this is my last on the subject, gentlemen. I promise this time that I won't make any more videos discussing this, because I know this kind of thing, it's tedious and it takes away from better content. So I'll leave it at that, and from here on out we'll move forward into the important job of examining what it means to be human and specifically what it means to be male. So gentlemen, thanks for listening.